There was a flurry of good roster news for North Carolina on Friday from both current and future Tar Heels, and I don't know about you, but it's got me leaning into some newfound hope ahead of next season.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Monday, March 27th, 2023. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and I want to thank you for joining us to timestamp this thing because it's always fun to do during the NCAA tournament. I'm recording this between Sunday's Elite Eight games, so we just saw San Diego State knock off Creighton to move to their first ever Final Four, where they will take on FAU, who is also in their first ever Final Four. The winner is going to be in the NCAA championship game. What a wild time it is. And so we'll have Texas and Miami coming up here in just a little bit. Coming up on the show, listen, if you've been tracking with me, you know that the plan for today was to do my next Stay or Go episode, and that would be with Caleb Love. But with all the news over the weekend, I felt it important and necessary to push that to Tuesday's show and to unpack all of the news from over the weekend. And so hopefully we won't hear anything from Caleb before Tuesday's show so that we can get that one in ahead of that. If we do get news from Caleb, obviously that will be the main talking point tomorrow as well. So either way, Tuesday, I promise you, we'll be talking about Caleb Love. Let's get right into it. Because by the way, I am now 2 for 2 on these Stay or Go shows. We did Armando's show last week, Stay or Go, and then like the next day he announced he's staying. On Friday's show, it was RJ Davis, Stay or Go, and literally mid-morning on Friday, RJ announced he was staying. So, I guess we got to get that Caleb one going pretty quick here. So the first thing, I just said it, but we learned Friday mid-morning, just no fancy message or anything, just from RJ himself, that he would be returning for his senior year at North Carolina. For those of you watching on YouTube, I'm going to put up his tweet that he sent out to announce that return. And I love the simplicity of this. It's just a tweet that simply says Tar Heel for life, got a couple emojis like a blue heart and the ram, and just hashtag senior season. And with that very simple message, RJ Davis announces he's coming back. For me, I think this is massive. You have heard me talk about so much over the past year, our guy, Coach Pat Kilby, the same, how important we think RJ Davis is to this team. Like, all due respect to Caleb and others, but it's RJ and Armando that are the two guys that I think are the engines that make this thing go. And to have them back again, I am over the moon elated for what that means for Carolina next season. Now, obviously, and we're going to talk about this, there's a lot of other pieces that are in the mix right now that are moving that we're going to be talking about over the coming weeks and months. But getting RJ back, already having Armando back, is a foundation on which you can build a team. We've seen so many examples of it in this NCAA tournament of teams who have just pieced it together through the transfer portal and been able to make it happen. I feel really good about this. Really hopeful and looking to see a healthy season from RJ. Obviously, he was mostly healthy, but that shooting index finger, man, it really hurt him last year. But what you've heard me talk about this multiple times, when he was okay and didn't have the tape on, he was on fire. I cannot imagine what this season would have been like for him in totality had he not been hurt. I am hopeful that that is next year for RJ. I want to see all of that pick and roll action that we saw last year between RJ and Armando, just eating teams alive with it. It wasn't as effective, or perhaps wasn't used as much this season, but I'm hopeful for that. Now, depending on the other backcourt personnel, I would love to see RJ have full control of this team, being the ball handler, the main ball handler, being the main decision maker. Or if not, depending on like if there's a true point guard on the roster, be it a freshman or through the transfer portal, moving RJ to the off the ball to the 2 guard and letting him just attack and just bomb away from three. I know he would be an undersized two guard, but that's where he is at his strength. And we've seen like Marquise Noel. What a great example of just a dude who's under 6 feet tall himself. And so really excited about that. The next thing is Jalen Washington. Later on Friday afternoon, we saw some great stuff from him too. He tweeted out, he quote tweeted RJ Davis and just said, "Let's get it 4," meaning, hey, you and me, buddy, let's get after it. I'm so glad you're back. And essentially, I'm back too. Again, no big announcement, no big like, hey, I'm coming. And to me, there's no other real way to read this other than I'm locked in for my sophomore year at North Carolina. And so obviously for those of you who are watching, you can see that on screen there. I've posted it up. Those of you listening, obviously you can go and find it. So this was not a direct, hey, I'm coming back. But to me, this is the obvious takeaway, and that's confirmation enough. And so with Jalen Washington back, here's the take on that to me. Unless there's some other transfer portal player that comes in that is just big time and established, we now have the starting front court and the starting 1 or 2. RJ Davis is going to start in the backcourt at one of the 2 positions, and Armando Bacot obviously at the 5. And then barring something, unforeseen or somebody else coming in, I project Jalen Washington to be the starting 4. Again, as of right now on Sunday, March 26th, and I know you're listening to this on Monday, March 27th or after, but that's where we're at right now. I'm just really excited to see what a full healthy offseason, I should say, for Jalen Washington allows him to do next season. There's so much potential there. You saw it in bits and pieces this year, but keep in mind, it was always going to be limited because of an inability to get his stamina up, and inability to just have a full offseason working in with the team. I'm very, very excited for sophomore Jalen Washington. Some other news, obviously, we learned on Saturday that Wilcher was going to transfer out. Now the 5th Tar Heel to do so since the transfer portal opened up right after Selection Sunday. And while I hate to say it, I'm fine with this from a North Carolina standpoint and a Wilcher standpoint. Unfortunately, I just don't ever see that he was going to be somebody that was going to be any level of major or consistent contributor for North Carolina. Obviously we'll wait to see where he lands, but I project that Wilcher will wind up at more of a mid-major or low-major program, somewhere where he could get more playing time. Maybe he wants to stay at the high-major level where he could continue to be a bench piece, but if he wants significant playing time, I think it'll have to be at the mid-major or lower level. And so grateful to Will for coming to be a Tar Heel, but that's where that's at. And again, that's part of the deal in this day and age that we're all going to have to wrap our minds around. The other thing with this is it gives Carolina the opportunity to try some things in the transfer portal, to take maybe some risky shots. It's like if you're in a fantasy football draft, late in the draft, you're wanting high risk, high upside. And with the amount of scholarships Carolina has available, they can go do that now. Somebody like Nick Timberlake, the guy from Towson, who we'll talk more about on Tuesday's show, by the way, along with Caleb Love. But if he's somebody that you're not sure on, with the amount of scholarships Carolina has, you can take a risk on that now. And I'm here for it. And so we wish, as with all these guys that have transferred out, we wish the best to Will in his next steps. And obviously I'll keep you up to date on what we learn. Now, here's the other thing, kind of similar to Jalen Washington. Seth Trimble tweeted something out, and I'm going to post it on the screen right now as well. And I'll describe it for those of you who are listening and not watching the show. Seth, following the Wilcher news, tweeted out a picture of this year's 4 freshmen. So Tyler Nickel, Wilcher, Jalen Washington, and Seth Trimble. The 4 of them in Times Square. I'm assuming it took place when they were in New York for the CBS Sports Classic, where we had that epic Pete Nance shot to help knock off Ohio State, sending Carolina to overtime. What a game. But it's a picture of the 4 of them in Times Square. And he just said, man, with lots of N's and like a single tear emoji. And I interpret this to mean thus. thus, I don't know what you say there, whatever. Again, Seth Trimble hasn't said anything definitive about staying or transferring, but similar to Jalen, here's how I'm going to interpret that tweet. It could be just like, hey, we're all four going to be in different places next year, and I'm really sad about that because I'm transferring out too. Or it could be, hey, Jalen and I are going to both be at Carolina next year, and we're really sad that Tyler Nickel won't be, and really sad that Will Shaver won't be either. I am interpreting it as that way. Like, hey, we thought we had the four of us together, and this is not going to be the reality. And so to me, and again, we don't have anything definitive on it, but to me, this subtle tweet is Seth Trimble's kind of confirmation that he will be part of the Tar Heels roster next season. So with all of this news that we've just talked about, the RJ Davis news, the Jalen Washington news, Will Shaver, and maybe Seth Trimble news based on what I just said, there's a lot to unpack about what all this means ahead of next season. And we're going to talk about that very next. But before we get there, I need to talk to you about Built Bar. The Built Bar March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite bar or puff, and now's your time to make it count. So go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. You know I'll be voting for the churro bar because that thing is awesome, and I want you to figure out who you're going to vote for. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you will be entered in a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will receive a free box of Built Bars or puffs. And one lucky Locked On listener will win a 12-month subscription to Built, where you will monthly have a box delivered directly to your door. You got to try Built. It's so good. It's amazing, and you won't even think it's good for you. Why is it so good? Well, for starters, high in protein, low in sugar, and it's covered in real chocolate. So run to builtmarchmadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. Built Bar, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. Folks, make sure you check out Locked On's brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball, where myself and Andy Patton bring you everything you need to know from around the college basketball landscape. Obviously, this whole week, we're going to be talking Final Four. In the lead up, we've got two brand new Final Four teams that have never been there. It'll be three if Miami wins this upcoming game, which you'll obviously know by the time you are listening or watching to this. Okay, so now let's begin to unpack everything that I just talked about and what it means for Carolina for next year. For those of you watching, I've put up on the stream the scholarship chart that I always make. For those of you listening, no worries. I'm going to talk about it as we go. What does all that movement we just looked at, what does all of it mean for this year? Well, as of right now, it means that there are 5 open scholarships. Because you've lost all these guys, Justin McCoy, Tyler Nickel, Dontrez Styles, and Puff Johnson, and now Will Shaver. And so it would be 6, but with Armando coming back, it's 5. So those on the roster currently, as you can see, are Armando Bacot, RJ Davis, Caleb Love, DeMarco Dunn, Seth Trimble, Jalen Washington, and the freshmen Zayden High and Simeon Wilcher. So what is Carolina going to do with these 5? Well, the assumption is that they will all be used in the transfer portal. As I just alluded to, because there's 5 right now, you can kind of take some chances, right? If you've got a bona fide Power 5, Power 6 level player who's interested, go get him. If he fits and makes sense, absolutely. But you can take some chances on a guy that might be transferring up, like Nick Timberlake, like we just talked about. And so we've already heard Carolina connected to several names. There's already several players that Carolina has reached out to and has been connected with. And so we'll keep our eyes out on that. Interestingly, I was told over the weekend of a specific player from the Power 6 level who is interested in Carolina, but is kind of waiting to see how things play out with the current roster. Obviously right now it's one of those where it would be highly inappropriate of me to say a name because it is rumor at this point, at least as far as I'm concerned, because it's second or third hand to me. And so while I do trust the source of where it came from, because it's multiple steps removed from me, I don't want to pass it on until it's something confirmed. But I will say, if it happens, it would be a wonderful, wonderful addition that I would love for the Tar Heels. So I'm hopeful for that. Obviously, we will keep our eyes out on it. A couple other things with all this, like one of the questions is, so what are we still waiting to learn? Well, I had several versions of this type of question asked to me on Twitter over the weekend. Are we really having to hear a declaration from every player? Can't we just assume that no news is good news and they're sticking around? Yeah, I would love that. And I guess ultimately no news is good news. But in this day and age of the transfer port, the one-time transfer portal where players can now transfer and play without sitting out, of NIL and how that's affecting player movement, of the COVID eligibility, which is still a thing for this year's upcoming senior class. RJ and Caleb's class is the last one that has that COVID extra year. And so while no news is good news at this point in time, I'm waiting. I want to hear from every player one way or the other. And so there are 13 scholarships. 2 of them are gone. Obviously, Leaky and Pete have exhausted their eligibility. And so there are 11 players left over from Carolina's roster that still have eligibility. And I want to hear from every one of them before I feel confident that they're either leaving or staying, because it's just the way it is. You're going to have players you never expected to leave. Like Tyler Nickel or Puff Johnson. You're going to have players you never expected to stay. Like a lot of us felt about Dontrez Styles or DeMarco Dunn last offseason. And so I want to hear from every player that they're staying or going. Now, it's kind of that thing where when we get to May 11th, which is when the transfer portal closes, if we get to May 11th and you haven't heard anything, well, then that means they're staying. That's good news. I mean, they could still leave after that point. Don't miss that. But they would have to sit out. It's just that the one-time transfer window rule is only open for that 60 days. So yes, I'm expecting some type of public acknowledgement from all of these guys. So who are those 11? Well, we've already had 5 transfer out, so that gets the number down to 6. And then of those 6, we've obviously heard from Armando Bacot, RJ Davis, Jalen Washington, and I would say that Seth Trimble tweet I talked about earlier gives you confirmation on his intentions. So that means of the 6, there are 2 we are yet to hear from, and that's obviously Caleb Love and DeMarco Dunn. And so those are the 2 we're waiting on. We might get a more firm confirmation from Seth Trimble. We might get a more firm confirmation from Jalen Washington. But again, I think we know where we're at with those 2 guys. So really it's Caleb and DeMarco that we're still waiting to hear from. Obviously, we're going to hear something from Caleb. DeMarco is the one that, you hope to hear something one way or the other, but you just don't know. By the way, about this chart, I want to mention 2 questions I was asked on Twitter about it over the weekend, about the purpose of it and its intentions. And so I just want to address those. When I talk here about that there are 5 open scholarships, somebody came, just followed up in the comments and said, actually, they have 6, meaning open scholarships. Love is gone, or are you just holding out hope he stays? And this is a fair question because I think a lot of people assume that Caleb is gone. But there is no public acknowledgement of that. And until it's public and confirmed, I am not going to assume that. He could just as easily come back. And so I just need you to know the purpose with which I make these charts. I base them only on 2 things: confirmed public information. I don't make these charts on any speculation or what is assumed to happen, because you get that wrong and then you've led people astray. And so anytime you see me put one of these out on Twitter, which is where I put them, it's only going to be based on verified public knowledge. Unless I just get some kind of scoop that is a guaranteed scoop, you're only going to see this be what is out there in the world. So Caleb Love right now is assumed as on Carolina's 23-24 roster until we hear otherwise, either from him or from official school channels. So that's why right now I have it as 5, and that's why I won't have it as 6. And that's all due respect. I don't mean that any ill way towards the person that asked me that. And then the second thing that was asked back on this is, do you all really expect Ian Jackson to be around more than a year? Because as you know, if you're either watching this or you've seen it of mine on Twitter, Basically, what I do is project out all the eligibility a player has, regardless of what we think they're going to do. Again, I don't do any speculation or projection. It's solely based on what eligibility a player has. So, for example, right now, it's got Ian Jackson listed on all the way out through 27-28 when he would be a senior, along with the rest of the 2024 class. And so, again, the answer to the question, do you expect Ian Jackson to really be around that long? Of course not. Nobody does. No one expects him to be around more than a year or maybe two. But the purpose of the chart, again, is not to speculate, but to show the possibilities of every player's eligibility if they choose to exhaust it. Because we've all seen examples of this. Harrison Barnes was picked a preseason All-American his freshman year. No one expected him to be around more than a year, but he was around 2. It would have been inappropriate of me to not include all of his eligibility and to assume that he would move on. That's too much pressure. Or the same with Caleb, right? Everyone thought Caleb coming in, one and done. He's now been in North Carolina for 3 years. So who knows with Ian Jackson? He might not translate to the college level as immediately as we expect. Now, what is the more likely of those two things? The more likely is that he will be a one and done, but we don't know. So again, when you look at these charts that I put out, it's not based on any speculation. It's just based on fact and based on what's possible for a player's eligibility. If you want to create a different chart, knock yourself out. That's great. But I've created these to show currently known public fact and possible eligibility. So there you go. That's just what I wanted to say about those things. Now, speaking of Ian Jackson, do have some news from him and from another of the class of 2024 commits to North Carolina, as well as some sad news about the brother Eric Montross. We'll get to all of that in just a second. On Friday's show, we talked about Ian Jackson. We addressed all these rumors of Rick Pitino pursuing him to try to get him to St. John's to be a splashy recruit there for the Red Storm as Pitino returns to the high major level in the Big East. We talked about it Friday's show. I suggested that we all probably had some trepidation and fear about what would happen here because of what happened with GG Jackson last summer, right? Like, he was in, and then there were all these rumors that started bubbling up, and it was murky and weird, and no one knew what was going on. But despite that fear, I suggested that we shouldn't fear anything here or be concerned until there was something to be concerned about. And I gave some reasons why I felt that this was a different scenario than the GG Jackson scenario was last summer. And thankfully, that all proved true because on Friday, Ian Jackson definitively reaffirmed his commitment to North Carolina. And so he said this to 247 Sports, quote, "The rumors are not true. Coach Pitino is at St. John's and is a Hall of Fame coach, but my plan is to stay at North Carolina. I'm 100% committed." Doesn't take many words, does it? That was 30 words from Ian Jackson. That was very clear and defined and precise. That man is 100% committed to the Tar Heels. No, I know you might quibble with my plan is to stay at North Carolina, so that might not seem as firm, but right after that, I'm 100% committed. Jackson went on to say, "The season was rocky, meaning at North Carolina, but everyone has not so great seasons sometimes. I believe in those guys. I'm still fully committed to the school, and I like Coach Davis and what he can do as a coach." Here's the thing for me. GG Jackson never did anything last summer that definitive. He was always kind of wishy-washy when pushed on things. And so that was part of what led a lot of people to be concerned about his commitment to North Carolina. That's not Ian Jackson. He's coming out and saying, listen, folks, make no bones about it. I'm a Tar Heel, and that's where I'm going. I appreciate this, and I think it's very well handled and mature on his part to not waver and to not waste Coach Pitino's time or Coach Davis's time, right? Like, I think that's a very mature decision of him and whoever helped him get to this decision. Moreover, I really appreciate how he handled this. He didn't badmouth or put down Coach Pitino. He honored Coach Pitino and his legacy, but again, very specifically and directly stated his intentions to reaffirm his desire to be at North Carolina. And also, by the way, confirmed like he has zero intention of reclassifying into 2023. He's got things he continues to want to work on with his game and to stay in the class of 24. So that's interesting news for Carolina as well. I also mentioned there was news on another North Carolina 24 commit, and that is James Brown, who's from the Chicago area. But Brown announced over the weekend that he is going to transfer for his senior year to Link Academy in Branson, Missouri, which interestingly enough is like an hour and a half away from where I live. And if that name sounds familiar to you, Link, that's because that's where Elliot Cadeau, also a North Carolina commit, attends. I love this move. It's two future Tar Heels getting together, a guard and a big, and they're going to play together their senior year, and that's going to help them immensely step into playing together where they don't have to have that awkward dance of figuring each other out when they come to North Carolina. I'm a massive fan of this decision and this move, and I think I might need to take a trip down there and see these guys in action next year. Would love for anyone to come join me for that. By the way, James Brown also has a new Twitter account if you want to follow him, James Brown UNC 13, and that's the numbers 13, not written out. Well, folks, unfortunately need to end today's show on a bit of, I don't know if I'd call it, I mean, it is sad news, but it's just tough news. Eric Montross announced over the weekend through official Carolina channels that he has cancer and is undergoing treatment at the UNC Lineberger Cancer Center. You probably know that Eric Montross was one of the linchpins, George linchpins, that's funny, of the 93 national championship team, and now provides color commentary and analysis on Carolina's basketball games. Big man, big grits for those of you that listen to the Carolina Insider Pod. Such a good man, such a big part of the Carolina family, and so you hate to hear this. And the reason I hesitated to say it's sad is because you love how he's attacking it. The news itself is sad, but you love the resolve of he and his family to say, hey, here's how we're approaching this. And we're so grateful for everyone that's offered thoughts. And here's how we as a family are taking this in. And you can, if you want to read the full statement, you can do that. It's on the Carolina basketball Twitter page. But Eric Montross, a 51-year-old man, is going through cancer. Obviously, we'll process this together as a Tar Heel family in the days and weeks and months ahead. But me, as a person of faith, I kind of wear that on my sleeve. Don't mind saying that if you are a person of prayer, I would ask you to join the family in lifting up Eric in his treatment plan. I would ask you to lift up the rest of his family in prayer around him, because those of you who have either been through cancer or know people who did, it's not just the person, it's the whole family that has to rally together. And to pray for wisdom also for the doctors who will be taking care of Eric and his family. And I too offer my own personal prayers to Eric and the entire Montross clan and all the medical professionals attending to him. Folks, that's it for today's show. As we talked about, we will be looking at, finally, Caleb Love's stay or go on tomorrow's show. Excuse me. Or if he already announced his news, obviously we'll talk about that as well. We'll talk more about Nick Timberlake, a transfer portal target for North Carolina. And so we'll be looking at that. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Heels. You can follow me at Isaac Shade. Email the show lockedontarheels@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe, smash the like button, and leave comments. And please don't forget to check out Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and anywhere else you get podcasts. I want to remind you, folks, whether there's good news or bad news or difficult news with illness, it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. Until tomorrow, peace.